He is short, he is unathletic, and he attends his fights overweight. Andy Ruiz is the exact opposite of what you'd expect from a heavyweight champion in boxing. While Mike Tyson and most other world champions look like Greek gods, Andy Ruiz rather looks like someone you'd see at an all-you-can-eat buffet than in a boxing ring. Yet, he still managed to win multiple Golden Gloves and become the first Mexican-American heavyweight champion, winning the WBA, WBO, and IBF titles. But how did this out-of-shape dude become a heavyweight champion in boxing? Well, it wasn't because of his size. With 6'2", he is on the smaller side compared to giants like Tyson Fury, who is 6'9". It also isn't because of his physique, as he is often fighting at over 280 pounds. So what is it? The answer lies in Ruiz's unique journey and upcoming. He grew up in Imperial, California, in rather humble beginnings. Now, Imperial is not really known for producing world-class athletes, and is better known for the crime rates and statistics. Ruiz's father recognized the dangers of criminality and wanted to prevent Ruiz from going down that path, so he introduced his son to boxing at a very young age, a decision his father should now be pretty proud of. Andy quickly obsessed with boxing, and according to his own statements, the boxing gym became a second home for Ruiz, and he spent countless hours in there. Despite his unconventional physique, Ruiz quickly has shown that he has some natural talent for boxing.
We get ready for round 5. Chris Maddox, I hate to ask you this, with all the knockdowns, how do you have it scored so far?
Wild third round that I scored 10-8 for Andy Ruiz.
Some people close to him said that in his early training sessions, no one believed that this chubby kid would have that kind of agility and speed in his hands. This is something that would go through his entire career, where people made fun of him first because of his appearance, and then they were shocked how good he is. But we are going in more detail on that in just a second. Now, his coaches and sparring partners were extremely surprised that he was able to easily compete with people that have been training this sport for years. Fast forward to Ruiz's amateur career, he began making waves in his local boxing communities. From most, he would be mocked for being the little fat kid, but his fighting record, especially in amateur fighting, speaks for itself. During his time doing amateur fights, he had a record of 105 wins and only 5 losses, which in today's boxing world is not that common anymore. Back in the time of Muhammad Ali, it was quite common that you make at least 100 boxing fights or go to Olympia before you turn pro. But in today's boxing climate, this is becoming more and more rare, with Tyson Fury, for example, only having 35 fights with a record of 31-4. Anyways, during his time as an amateur boxer, he won multiple awards in different tournaments, like in the Golden Glove competitions. What made people really aware of him is that despite not having the body of a boxer, he was knocking out people that did look like it left and right. The only problem he had at that time, not many people believed he could become pro, and a lot of well-known promoters rather take boxers who really looked like Greek gods, because at that time they believed they would be easier to market. However, his successful amateur career laid the foundation for him to become a professional boxer, because at one point people weren't able to ignore him anymore. And maybe it was even because of his unconventional physique that so many people got interested in him. Even Joe Rogan later pointed out the following: "People love you because you're kind of chubby. Andy Ruiz is kind of built like me, and he's the champ of the world." So in 2009, he decided to go pro, despite many people telling him that this move was way too risky. But he still went with his decision and signed with Top Rank. And what seemed to be his biggest disadvantage became one of his biggest advantages: his physique. At first, he would build his record against lower-level opponents. For example, his first professional fight would be against Miguel Ramirez on March 28, 2009. He won the round in the first round through knockout. And the same thing repeated with his second fight, where knocked out his opponent in the first round, or in his fourth and fifth fight. As I said earlier, his physique was often seen as a disadvantage, but it quickly turned into a huge advantage, because his opponents simply underestimated him. In the Joe Rogan podcast, he put it in the following words: "People would look at me and think, look at this chubby kid Manny. He's gonna get tired really fast. He's gonna get knocked out." But as we now know, this was obviously not the case, and just looking at his boxing skills, he was the better boxer. But we are going to talk about what really made him so good in just a second. Now, as he continued to rack up wins, he faced another huge problem: the lack of recognition. Despite his impressive record, many potential opponents started to view him as a high-risk, low-reward fighter. Some people even compared it to fighting a woman, where it's a lose-lose situation. Either you win and nobody is surprised, or you lose and everybody laughs at you for getting beat up by a woman. Or in this case, it basically means if Andy's opponents won, nobody would be surprised as he is seen as the little chubby kid, and if they lose, everybody would laugh at them for getting beat up by a guy like this. And these struggles to find good opponents were extremely evident in his financial situation. At this time, Ruiz and his family struggled to make ends meet, which is a common problem for many up-and-coming boxers. The lack of big money fights and limited opportunities were hard for him. But to make things even worse, his relationship with his promoter, Top Rank, began to crumble. He felt like wasn't getting the fighting opportunities he deserved. He made the difficult decision to buy out of his contract. With the financial problems he already had, this made things even worse, but he saw it as a necessity to advance his career. In retrospect, the decision to buy out of his contract was the best decision he could have made, because it didn't take long until he got the opportunity of his lifetime. See, in late 2018 and early 2019, the boxing world was heavily anticipating Anthony Joshua's US debut. At that time, Joshua held the WBA, WBO, and IBF title, and originally it was planned that he was going to face Jarrell Miller, who is also called Big Baby, and at that time was also undefeated. However, Miller failed multiple drug tests, which threw over all of the plans. What made it even worse for the promoters? Everything was already planned: the time, the date, and the place. So the promoters really had to find a new fighter. And as this news of Miller's disqualification started to spread, Ruiz saw his opportunity. At first, Eddie Hearn, the promoter of the fight, tried everything to get Luis Ortiz. However, his team rejected 2 offers, and therefore the fight didn't start. Now, at the same time, Ruiz began relentlessly messaging Eddie, pushing for a shot at the title. The timing for Ruiz was perfect, because he just won against Alexander Dimitrenko. He had an amazing fighting record, and he was still in fight shape, which made him the ideal last-minute replacement. Eventually, Eddie gave in and he gave Ruiz the shot. However, at that time, not many people believed he could win. In fact, many people made fun of him for his chubby physique at the press conferences, without looking at his prior fights. Therefore, many believed it would be an easy win for Joshua, especially because Joshua already had some successful title defenses, so they were seeing Ruiz as cannon fodder. However, those that knew Andy Ruiz and his impressive career recognized him as a live dog, meaning a fighter that had the potential to win. And this is the same opportunity Ruiz saw, and to be honest, the timing couldn't be more perfect for him. After his fight against Dimitrenko, he only has taken a short week-and-a-half break before jumping back into training camp. And he said the same thing in an interview where he said, "I was already loose, I was already in fight mode, it couldn't happen in a perfect time." And to put this into perspective, for Ruiz this was the opportunity of a lifetime. After years of struggling with mediocre fights, having problems with his promotions, and basically flying under the radar, he was suddenly in the spotlight. In the lead up to the fight, Andy said that he was making good progress even though not a lot of people believed him, as his body was still looking chubby. But then it came. The 1st of June 2019. Ruiz stepped into the ring at Madison Square Garden to face Anthony Joshua, and even though you could see the determination in his eyes, few people gave him a chance. The first round started rather slow, and Joshua tried to force his style onto Ruiz. At first, Joshua was using his height advantage pretty well, leading with a lot of jabs. This would continue into the second round, and then the third round came. That changed everything, and many people claim it to be the best round in heavyweight boxing since Joshua beat Klitschko in 2017. The round started exactly as Joshua planned, and he hit Ruiz with a heavy left hook, which sent Ruiz to the canvas. And I guess a lot of people already believed their sports bets would go smooth. But Ruiz got back up on his feet and was ready for Joshua, who would come after him, trying to end the fight. However, Ruiz wasn't as hurt as Joshua had thought, and he was able to land a barrage of counterpunches and turn the fight around, which caught AJ off guard, and suddenly Joshua was the one who found himself on the floor. At this point, you could clearly see that Joshua's ego was hurt, and he was in a situation he wasn't prepared for. The fight started to shift dramatically, and Ruiz's unique boxing style seemed to be the exact counter to AJ's standard straightforward and robotic style. As Joe Rogan later said, "You have fluid punches, man. The way you throw punches, you're not like grunting and digging. Your punches just come in bunches. It's pop. You just moments. The combinations." And it was exactly this ability of Ruiz to throw rapid combinations and being an extremely good in-fighter is what caught Joshua off guard. His punches came from unexpected angles, making it difficult for AJ to defend. To this, Joe Rogan also said, Your punches are coming at all these different angles and so fluid. As the rounds went by, Ruiz continued to pressure Joshua, and in the 7th round, he crumbled. Ruiz landed another series of hard strikes that sent Joshua to the canvas twice more. After his 2nd knockdown, the referee had seen enough and waved off the fight, which means that Andy Ruiz was now the new unified heavyweight champion of the world. As you can imagine, the crowd was shocked. Andy Ruiz, the underdog, the chubby little kid, just pulled off one of the biggest surprises in boxing history. Not only did he manage to win by TKO against Anthony Joshua, who was seen to be the biggest boxing prodigy since Lennox Lewis, he also was the first Mexican boxer who won the world title in heavyweight boxing. But this title meant more than that. Suddenly, all of his financial problems were gone, and he even addressed that in the post-fight press conference where he said, "A lot of people don't know that we're struggling a lot even before this fight." All of a sudden, everyone spoke about him, and he found himself in the middle of the spotlight. And then the following question came up. How could a boxer that looks absolutely not like an athlete could become world champion? So let's break it down. The first and obvious point is his very unique boxing style. See, you can break down into boxers in a bunch of different styles, and while everyone has his own style to some extent, they all originate from one of these styles. For example, Floyd Mayweather relies on his heavy defensive style, where he uses the Philly shell and tries to slip punches rather than blocking them. Another example would be Deontay Wilder, who waits the entire fight for one shot and knock people out with just one punch. Or Vitaly Klitschko, who basically became the master of the jab and grab style, where he would wear down his opponents with his jabs, and if they got to close, he simply grabbed them and then starting the whole thing over again. But what is the difference with Andy Ruiz? Well, his style is hard to classify and hard to put into one category. He is not using extremely good footwork or extreme punching power to win his fights. He rather uses his exceptional hand speed and the sheer volume of the punches he throws. See, unlike other heavyweights, like Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder, who rely on single powerful punches, Ruiz overwhelms his opponents with a barrage of punches. As I said earlier, Joe Rogan already said about this, that his punches come in bunches. This rapid-fire approach keeps his opponents on the defensive and makes it difficult for his opponents to strike back, as they would easily get hit if they try to counter it, since they have to drop their guard as well. This is also what happened to Anthony Joshua. When you take a look at the fights, every time Joshua fought, he had the perfect moment to counter Ruiz attacks. He would get hit because Ruiz just kept on throwing punches at him. At the same time, he also has an insane speed in his hands, which makes it even more difficult to time the count. Now, you might think that if he throws that many punches, he has to get tired real quick, right? Well, with Ruiz, this isn't necessarily the case, as his punching technique is surprisingly efficient. While most fighters use a lot of their energy to throw heavy punches, his movements look very fluid. Now, the last thing that can be said about his punches are the angles he creates, especially against taller opponents. I guess he became really good at this because he is used to being the smaller man in heavyweight fights, so therefore he learned to become good at this. This brings us to his next huge skill, which is his in-fight ability. Ruiz is really good at closing the gaps between him and his opponents, and even more importantly, he doesn't fear to get a few hits on his way near the opponent. See, a problem many smaller fighters have is to close the distance against tall opponents because they are afraid to get hit too hard. With Ruiz, it looks like he simply doesn't care about getting hit, and he simply keeps moving forward, trying to get into the in-fight, because he knows he can put on way more damage on them if he closes the range than they can on him on his way forward. By doing this, the entire fight he can put a huge amount of pressure on his opponents and force them to make mistakes. In an interview, he said the following: "Imagine me pressuring bigger guys and throwing these combinations. It works for me really good." And this is as far as it goes with his fighting style per se. What also makes him scary is his physique. I already briefly mentioned this earlier, but let me explain a bit more in depth. See, you don't look at Andy Ruiz's body and start trembling in fear or start thinking that this guy would be able to knock out an athlete that's 6'9", built out of pure muscle. This is the same way of thinking his opponents had, which then made them underestimate him and his power. And if you take a look at what most top fighters have to say about the importance of psychology in fighting, they all believe that fighting is 90% mental and only 10% physical. So you can probably imagine that it's not the best thing to have a little chubby opponent in front of you where you think to to yourself that you are able to beat this man any day of the week, even without proper preparation. As it turned out in the second fight against Joshua, taking Ruiz seriously as a real boxer instead of underestimating him and preparing for his odd fighting style makes him an opponent that can be beaten. When Ruiz and Joshua got into the rematch on December 7th, 2019, it was clear that Joshua wanted to take this one home, and he dominated the fight being properly prepared for someone with Ruiz's style. Over the entire 12 rounds, he kept his distance to Ruiz, not trying to go for a spectacular knockout, but trying to land smart jabs and win in a decision, and the plan worked exactly as intended. A well-prepared AJ won against a lackluster prepared Ruiz that was not looking as sharp and scary as he did before. But even though Ruiz lost the rematch, he didn't give up and won 2 more fights since then. One against Chris Arreola and one against Luis Ruiz, showing that if he really takes those fights seriously and trains properly, he is a force to be reckoned with.